Welcome to the Full Moon Film Buff, episode 122. We're going to talk about The Wolves of Kromer from 1998. I watched this on Fandor. I had not seen this before. As always, we begin with the prominent crew and cast. The show notes include links to a complete credit list. The film was directed by Will Gould, his only feature film direction credit. It was written by Charles Lambert and Matthew Reed, with effects by Jonathan Josling. Will Gould is known primarily as a TV producer with the BBC. Two highlights are Peaky Blinders and The Gentleman. I could find little information about Charles Lambert. He has 3 writing credits, 3 producing credits, and 1 acting credit. Similar to Gould, Matthew Reed got his start as a writer before moving on to a much longer and much more prolific career as a producer for the BBC. Jonathan Josling's career lasted roughly 15 years. The cast includes Boy George as the narrator, James Layton as Gabriel, Lee Williams as Seth, Margaret Towner as Doreen, Rita Davies as Fanny, Rosemarie Dunham as Mrs. Drax, Kevin Moore as Father David, David Prescott as Mark, Angarad Reese as Mary, Matthew Dean as Kester, Leela Lloyd Evelyn as Polly, and Alastair G. Cumming as Michael. George Allen O'Dowd, known professionally as Boy George, is a British musician and cultural icon who emerged in the early 80s. As the lead singer of Culture Club, he captivated audiences with his distinctive androgynous style, soulful voice, and chart-topping hits like Karma Chameleon and Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? He challenged traditional gender norms as an influential figure in music and pop culture. His success was accompanied by personal struggles, including a well-documented battle with drug addiction that led to legal challenges in the 80s and 90s. Beyond music, Boy George has been a prominent LGBTQ plus activist, openly gay and unapologetically himself. While James Layton got his start acting in this film, he went on to a long and ongoing career in the camera and electrical departments of film production, including the Rings of Power television series. Lee Williams also started acting in this film, but he continued acting, primarily on British television. Margaret Towner had a brief acting career, the highlight of which was playing a minor character in Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace in 1999. Her partner in crime was played by Rita Davies, who had a much longer career spanning over 50 years. She appeared in Monty Python's Flying Circus and Monty Python and the Holy Grail in the 70s. A vast majority of her credit list is on British television. This was one of Rosemarie Dunham's last roles before she retired. She had appeared on British television for almost 40 years, with one of her first roles on the classic show, The Avengers. Kevin Moore is another British television actor, one who has a lot of clergy roles on his IMDb page. My favorite film he appeared in was Johnny English from 2003. This was David Prescott's last role in a decade-long career in film and television. Interestingly, this was also Angarad Reese's last role as well. She was best known for her television roles, particularly her prominent performance in the BBC series Poldark during the 1970s. This is Matthew Dean and Leela Lloyd Evelyn's only credit. One of Alastair Cummings' first roles was on Doctor Who. He worked steadily for over 40 years and is still in the game. This is a very unconventional werewolf story. Instead of a horror film, it's a clear allegory and a sweet fairy tale with a tragic ending. The budget constraints are evident, but the creative approach to werewolf mythology and its bold social commentary make it an intriguing watch. Like a lot of allegories, it simplifies the characters down to stock caricatures required to make the broader intended point. I do recommend it. The film was made on a modest budget of approximately £500,000 and shot primarily in Gloucestershire, England. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. It was based on a play. So now let's cover the synopsis. Gabriel and Seth are 2 young wolves living on the outskirts of Kromer. 2 old women, Fanny and Doreen, plot to kill the elderly Miss Drax. They are also creepily obsessed with Father David, who sits with Mrs. Drax. Fanny and Doreen gossip about the unclean wolves who live in the forest. Gabriel and Seth have a conversation around a campfire, making the werewolf equals gay metaphor crystal clear. Fanny and Doreen are first-class bitches. At church, the entire congregation is presented as either idiots or bigots. After services, they complain about the wolves. Seth worries that he's not really a wolf, or maybe he hopes he's not. The wolves head to the local lake where other wolves congregate as a pack. The wolves mug the normies to get spending cash. Seth and Gabriel hang out at an arcade and flirt before they steal a motorcycle. Father David shoots at them during a rural English car chase. Mrs. Drax's grandson Kester is along for the wolf hunting. Fanny and Doreen drug Mrs. Drax and leave her out at night by a forest pond. Gabrielle and Seth are nearby making out. They rob her while she's unconscious, and she later dies. Her body is found the next morning. Seth breaks up with Gabrielle because he keeps having sex with wolves who fake not being wolves by having wives and kids. Get the metaphor? Fanny and Doreen dress up in Mrs. Drax's clothes and jewelry. Mrs. Drax's granddaughter, Polly, picks up Seth and has sex with him. He hints that he's a wolf, but he still enthusiastically participates with her. Gabrielle gets depressed as a result. Mark and Mary wonder if Kester might be a wolf. Seth goes back to Gabriel and tells him he slept with a girl. Gabriel lies to Seth about what women are like. Kester and Father David argue about why God hates wolves. Father David begs God to let him kill a wolf to prove how much he hates wolves. Kester runs into Gabriel and flees in a panic. Father David shoots at Gabriel, who runs. Mary puts two and two together and tries to figure out what Doreen and Fanny did. Kester tells his father he saw a wolf. Mark and Father David raise a proper armed mob to hunt Gabriel. Seth accepts he really is a wolf and confesses to Polly. Father David confronts Gabriel in the ruined church and shoots him dead. Not knowing Gabriel is dead, Seth confesses his love to him. Father David then kills Seth as well. As Father David walks away, we see a tail under his robe. Mary puts together the evidence and has Fanny and Doreen arrested. Father David tries to maintain the community's hatred of the wolves, but the congregation realizes that they were wrong. In the final scene, Gabriel and Seth dance together in heaven. Unlike traditional werewolf films, there are no transformations here. The wolves are represented by young men in fur coats wearing wolf-like makeup. Subtle ear points, claws in place of fingertails, and long bushy tails complete the look. This stylized approach serves the film's metaphorical intentions while working within the budget constraints, but don't come here expecting to see an amazing werewolf makeup job. The film clearly uses werewolf mythology as a metaphor for queerness. These wolves are born. They're not created by infection or ritual, even if the uninformed public does not believe this truth. Wolves do not transform with the full moon. A person either is or is not a wolf. There is no mention of any specific weakness. Wolves maintain human consciousness and identity. They live in packs of chosen families and are persecuted by society for their nature. I understand why the filmmakers chose to use lycanthropy as a metaphor for gayness. They feel broad society is afraid of gay men. Audiences are also afraid of werewolves, so they build upon that link. My big objection is that werewolves, as typically portrayed, are something that should be feared in a way that queer people are not. It does feel like they undermine their point. It's like when the X-Men wonder why people are nervous about them. They have individuals on the team with the power to level buildings. Yeah, you'd be nervous. So let's talk about this. Some artistic works argue persuasively for certain social realities through metaphorical storytelling. And The Wolves of Kromer exemplifies this approach, using werewolves as a potent metaphor for the marginalization of gay men within conservative social structures. Now, you could broaden the metaphor to a wider exploration of the perceived treatment of the bigger LGBTQ plus community, but I'm going to focus on the narrower theme as it's spelled out in the movie. The wolves in this narrative are not presented as monsters. They're complex beings trapped between their nature and a society that vilifies them and actively seeks to eradicate them. Each wolf character navigates a world seeking to define them through fear, misunderstanding, and exclusion. The townspeople's response to the wolves ranges from understandable to regrettable ignorance to outright violent oppression. Pushed to the periphery, they face limited economic opportunities, leading to criminal behaviors that reinforce the negative stereotypes. Because they're social outcasts, they are dirty and dress in cast-off clothing. They look and act out of place. Now, the film deliberately evokes AIDS-era anxieties, with villagers fearful of the wolves carrying disease. Finally, some community members deliberately scapegoat the wolves, using their outsider status to deflect blame and to manipulate the broader social dynamics. The villagers' reactions are partly about confronting a perceived threat, but they're also about maintaining social order, and hypocritically using the wolves' outsider status to break social norms themselves. The film strongly criticizes religious institutions through the vicar and the town's moral panic. I get why. I think they push too hard, but I'm not going to argue too much. While ostensibly preaching Christian values, Father David actively encourages prejudice and violence. It's confirmed towards the end of the film that his extreme response to the wolves' existence is an externalized projection of his internal guilt and shame for being a closeted wolf. He desperately wishes he was not plagued by this sinful nature and hopes that by eliminating other wolves, he can eradicate that part of himself. The allegory is not subtle. It is explicitly spelled out regularly, but it does invite viewers to recognize how communities are ostracized. The wolves are feared and hunted, their existence framed as a threat to the community's stability. This dynamic illustrates the real-world experiences of gay men who have been scapegoated, criminalized, and subjected to collective trauma for making choices outside the societally approved ones. Ultimately, The Wolves of Kromer is more than a supernatural tale. It's an exploration of difference, belonging, and the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, I plan on taking an intentional detour to discuss the werewolf-adjacent film Brotherhood of the Wolf from 2001. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back here next episode.